Great. Thank you, Katie. So yeah, hi, I'm Julia, and my thesis is about using an action research approach to address a wicked situation in coastal management in Sri Lanka. And I'd like to start off by just defining some of the key concepts that I'm engaging with here. So first off, action research. So action research is a research methodology that aims to find practical solution by combining doing research with taking action. So it's a participatory process and it heavily relies on critical reflection. The other key concept that I'm engaging with here are wicked situations or wicked problems. So wicked problems are unique conflict situations where even the scope and the nature of the problem itself is contested. So there's no obvious solution and they usually require a more nuanced approach for addressing them. And sustainability issues, climate change, and natural resource management are all examples of wicked problems. So wicked problems can also be defined according to three key elements. The first one is complexity, which refers to the number of elements that influence the situation or any given kind of subsystems or interdependencies. The second one is divergence, which refers to the divergence of value systems, viewpoints between stakeholders. And the third one is uncertainty, which refers to kind of both the overall uncertainty about the future of the situation, but also about the outcomes that certain strategic interventions might have or the risks associated with them. So if the level of each of these three elements is high, then we can talk about a wicked situation. And as I already said, wicked situations often require addressing them using a little bit of a different approach. So systems thinking is one of the tools that can be used to address wicked situations. And it works by constructing these conceptual constructs or models of real-world situations that can be used to identify possible tools or points for improvement. There's a strong focus on the relationships between elements of a system and their kind of interconnections. It's also a more holistic approach focused on learning and adaptation, and it also takes the positionality of the researcher into consideration and has been described as an under-recognized tool for sustainability science. So one area that's particularly prone to the development of wicked problems are coastal regions, and that's because they're influenced by both oceanic as well as terrestrial elements. There's usually a high influx of people that then requires balancing all these different human activities. And there's also often high environmental change. Those areas are often vulnerable to the impacts of climate change or to other coastal hazards. And that's also the case in my study site. So I conducted my fieldwork working in Olivelle, which is a community in southeastern Sri Lanka. As you can see here, it's located right next to the sea, and it has experienced dramatic environmental change over the last 20 years. So the situation in Olivelle is complex. It's influenced by a range of environmental pressures. There's high ongoing natural erosion, which has been exacerbated through the construction of Olivelle Harbour. There have also been drastic changes in fish abundance, which is important because fisheries used to be the main dominant occupation in Olivelle. And alongside the harbour construction, there have been a range of other infrastructure developments done in the framework of the Eastern Reawakening Programme, which was a government initiative that aimed to bring more kind of socioeconomic opportunities and development into Sri Lanka's rural eastern region following the civil war. There's still, though, many economic difficulties, such as high unemployment and high immigration. There's also high divergence in this region because there's high ethnic tension, and this community is a little bit in a transition right now from this traditional coastal and subsistence-based community to a more modernized society. And there have also been conflicts because of the harbour development between the community and the government, as well as within the community, due to issues of land ownership and compensation. The situation is also highly uncertain due to the impacts of sea level rise. It's highly vulnerable to sudden natural disasters. So the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, for example, had a huge impact in Olivelle. And there's high social and political uncertainty still following the Civil War, which only ended in 2009 after 25 years of conflict. So because the level of each of these three elements is high, we can classify Olivelle as a wicked situation. So my research aim was to investigate the social and ecological changes that have occurred here and to explore them using a critical systems approach. So my research questions were, one, what are these social and ecological changes that have occurred here and that have contributed to the development of this wicked problem? Two, which tools and frameworks are helpful for engaging with wicked problems and for addressing them? And 3, how can I, as a foreign early career researcher, intervene in this wicked situation and create a positive difference? Due to the timing of this presentation, I'm only gonna show the main outcomes to my first research question here. And as I already said, the research methodology that I used was action research, and action research is conducted in these consecutive action cycles. So each action cycle consists of a phase of planning, action, observation, and reflection, and the outcome of each cycle are used to determine the methods used and the focus taken in the next cycle. And I'm going to give you a brief overview now of the cycles that I used in my fieldwork period. So I conducted 4 action cycles. I started with using an interview protocol focused on eliciting cultural ecosystem services, but I found that this approach was a little bit too narrow, so I moved into a more open consideration of all social and environmental factors. Based on the outcomes of this second cycle, I organized a community workshop in the 3rd cycle, and then in the 4th cycle and my last cycle, I focused on disseminating the outcomes of this community workshop and evaluating its impact. During my fieldwork period, I also kept a reflective diary to really examine my own biases and how they were influencing the research process. So I'll give you a little bit more detail now about each of the action cycles. I don't have time to go in detail about my methods, but I'm happy to answer questions about this later. So my first action cycle, as I said, focused on cultural ecosystem services because I wanted to understand what the social impacts of these. So I conducted 7 in-depth interviews with community members using this interview protocol. And I learned that there had indeed been drastic environmental change in the last 20 years here. But I also realized that cultural ecosystem services actually wasn't the best framework to use here due to the intertwined nature of material and non-material benefits for the local community, and also because of the importance of negative experiences associated with the coast. I also realized that besides the local community, the beach was also used a lot by external visitors, so I decided to investigate their role more in the next cycle. So in the second cycle, I moved to a more open interview approach. So I used a narrative style interview method and conducted 28 interviews here with community members. And from these, I constructed a driver pressure state impact response, or DPSIR diagram, because DPSIR is one of the most commonly used frameworks for describing interactions between society and the environment. So I realized that in Olival, actually the main driver is the need for employment and income security, which has led to the harbor construction and the resulting main human pressure, which is the exacerbation of the natural erosion processes caused by its construction. This led to a decrease in environmental quality and the destruction and loss of many coastal ecosystems, such as the mangroves, the river delta, and many of the grass or coconut farms. This state change also had other environmental impacts, such as biodiversity loss, but also many socioeconomic impacts, and it caused a decrease in social cohesion. And that's because previously most community members were engaged in these coastal income-generating activities, such as fisheries or coconut farming, that have now been lost. And as a response to the loss of these ecosystems, there have been changes in occupation, attempts to address these, and also increased tension and conflict between stakeholders. So my main finding here was actually that there was a strong connection between the coastal environment and social cohesion. And that's because besides these coastal income generating activities, which were previously done in a collaborative way and are now lost or done in a more competitive way, the coastal environment was also used by the community for many informal gatherings or celebrations. And now with the loss of these physical spaces, social cohesion was also decreasing. So that was my main takeaway from this cycle, was the importance of this divergence between stakeholders, and also realizing that there's an opportunity here to address this wicked situation by focusing on social cohesion, which I did in my 3rd cycle. But first, for the second part of my second action cycle, I focused on understanding the perspective of these external visitors. So for this, I used a survey, and I conducted 31 beach surveys with these external visitors. And I found out that actually their perspectives very much mirrored the plurality of perspectives that were already present in Olival. And I realized that what's happening in Olival is more a sign of an ongoing regional transition rather than something just local to this community. In my third cycle then, as I said, I organized this community workshop to focus on social cohesion. So we conducted this workshop with 14 diverse community members, and the workshop consisted of two main activities. The first activity was a rich picture session, which is a visual collaborative activity that aimed to build a common understanding among participants. So we asked the question, what was the situation in Olival like 20 years ago, and what is the situation like now, and focused on highlighting the main environmental and social elements in each of those cases. In the second part of the workshop, after establishing this common understanding of the situation, we used a nominal group technique session, which is a structured decision-making tool to identify concrete actions or community practices that could be used to improve social cohesion. So we asked, what are existing positive practices in Olival that create a sense of community and spirit of cooperation? And it turned out that actually the most preferred option by all participants was that the mosque should be more involved in everyday activities with the community. So we followed up with this in the fourth action cycle, where we actually organized a meeting with the mosque board, and we shared all the outcomes from the workshop, and together tried to brainstorm kind of possible avenues for actually addressing this issue. So to summarize now, what are these social and ecological changes that have occurred in Olival during the last 20 years and that have contributed to the development of this wicked problem? So first of all, the main changes have been the degradation of the coastal environment, the loss of many of the coastal ecosystems, as I said, the mangroves, the river delta, and many of the grass and coconut farms, and the associated loss of these coastal income-generating activities that used to play such a big role in Olival. But the second key element here was, of course, the importance of these social factors that influenced the situation. So the loss of social cohesion, these conflicts between stakeholders within the community and between the community and the government, but especially this increasing divergence that kind of prevents finding any solution for this situation due to lack of good communication. In terms of addressing this wicked situation, we realized that it looks like there's an opportunity here for the coastal environment to actually take on this role of fostering social cohesion that was previously done by the coastal environment. And so there's a question if the mosque as an institution can actually fulfill this role. I would highlight something else here. So even though I didn't have time to go in detail about my third research question of how I, as a foreign early career researcher, can intervene here and create a positive impact, I'd still like to highlight the main outcome of this question, because this is the one that was most important for me personally. So I realized that actually the way I could have an impact here was by kind of transitioning from seeing myself more of an external expert and becoming more of a participatory facilitator and kind of really involving myself in the local situation. And that was, I think, the biggest takeaway for me. And that's why I really wanted to highlight this here. And I would like to end with a brief reflection on the limitations and opportunities of my chosen approach. So this combination of systems thinking and action research. So there's an opportunity here because this approach is very solution-oriented and also highly adaptive. So it's actually possible to produce practical outcomes that can really be used to improve a local situation. But of course, all the knowledge produced here is also highly contextual, and it can't be replicated or validated in the same way that we're used to from more hypothesis-driven research. And the research process is also much more emergent, so it doesn't follow the same linear trajectory for both communicating the research, but also for actually carrying it out than the more traditional research, as you've also seen now in my presentation. And so to conclude, in Olival, there's a high linkage between the social and environmental factors. Considering the social dimensions of coastal management is really crucial, and action research can be used as a flexible and adaptive methodology for engaging with wicked problems. And yeah, I'd just like to really thank, especially, of course, all my friends, advisors, and participants from Olival, my promoters and supervisors, and of course my friends and family.